Some weeks I'll have the camera on me, some weeks I won't. It just honestly depends on if I have time to record myself and put makeup on, if we're being honest. All right, so this is audience analysis and listening. So let's get started. So your classmates as an audience, just to put this a little bit into perspective, this may be an artificial speaking situation, but it's still good practice. So I know some of you from reading your information sheets are nervous as it is to be presenting in front of your class, but for some of you that are like, no big deal, whatever, never going to see these people again, it is really good practice because nonetheless, it still is an audience. As it says, remember your audience still consists of people with attitudes, ideas, and feelings. You impact us more than you realize, and that is true. And then consider every audience worthy of your best efforts. And that's just kind of a dignity thing. You want your audience deserves your best, whether it's our class, whether it is your friend. Anytime you're engaging in public speaking, they deserve your best, or anything in that matter. Okay. So let's get started. The psychology of audiences. Every speech contains two messages, and that is what the speaker says and what the audience hears. So the two messages that every speech contains are what the speaker says and what the audience hears. Sometimes that's the same thing. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you will say things as a speaker and you're like, oh yeah, I said this and I made it clear, and the audience is like, I just heard that they were being offensive, or that, they think that we need to do this, or, whatever. So it's important that we're aware of those two messages and aware of and kind of proactive about how the audience is going to understand and even retain sometimes the information we're saying. What a speaker says is filtered through a listener's frame of reference. That frame of reference is really important. So that's how we understand the world. It's filtered through our upbringing, through how we think about things, through, everything that makes us who we are. And people are egocentric. So WIIFM stands for what's in it for me. Okay. That's really important that you make it clear what's in it for them. Why should they care? Okay. All right. More on the psychology of audiences. Attitudes are general evaluations, good or bad, desirable or undesirable. So how they view different things. So is it good to help out strangers, or, desirable to, do this or that. Okay. Beliefs are our feelings about what is true and real. So our beliefs, and if you're, with beliefs, don't necessarily think of like religious beliefs. Because that goes more with values if it runs really deeply with you, if it's a really personal thing. Beliefs can even be, I think one of the books I've taught from gave the example, which I kind of liked, of if you believe in UFOs or if you believe in ghosts or spirits, right? Like, what is true and real? Do you think that's true? Do you think it's real? And our attitudes are based on beliefs. So beliefs might not be as silly as, or maybe you're like, that's not silly at all. And I don't mean to laugh at that, but if you do take it very seriously, that you have the belief that there are UFOs, that, it might not be as surface level as that, but that can be a thing of, something that is true and real. And then values are, as it says, steadfast judgments about what is good in life. And attitudes and beliefs are shaped by values. Okay. Why do these matter? Because you need to be aware, or try to be aware, of people's attitudes, beliefs, and values that you're speaking to, because that's going to affect your presentation. That's going to affect how you approach the presentation and how you acknowledge those things. If it's a persuasive speech, how you're going to try to change their behavior. Okay. All right. Types of audiences. A captive audience are disengaged listeners. So think of, if mnemonic devices work for you, think of kind of they're forced to be there. They're being held captive, if you will, not captivated. So disengaged listeners, they have to be there, whether it is a required training, a required in-service, whether it is, basically they have to be there. So they are usually, not always, they're usually not super excited to be there. So that can be an issue. So you want to be sure with all of these, well, I should say ahead of time, with all of these, it's helpful to know what type of audience you have, because that's going to affect the way you go about your presentation. Committed audience are agreeable listeners. So they believe in what you're saying. They want to hear you speak. But just because they're already on your team with everything doesn't mean that they deserve any less than your best, right? So these types of audiences can change. So you can be giving your presentation to a committed audience, but then you say something to offend them, or you give a crappy presentation and they're like, oh, that wasn't that good. That's kind of underwhelming. Okay. So you don't want to take advantage of your committed audience members. They still, as we said at the beginning, every audience deserves your best of efforts. Contrary audience are hostile listeners. So they might engage in listening to you to kind of trip you up. Okay. That, I know that sounds silly, but that can happen. I've seen it happen on our college campus at the university I went to. They would get, actually, I don't think they would get, I think people would ask to come and speak or whatever in the quad during, not passing periods, but you know how college is, just during, between classes. And they would always have this, a member of a very, very extremist belief. And I don't want to offend any of you, and people would, they like saying, and again, I don't want to offend you if you believe this, and I'm not, but I'm just giving you facts of what I experienced. They would say, have signs and the Bible and scream in a megaphone that, for example, they would say like gay people are going to hell. And so some people would literally flock over there just to, because they were contrary audience, just to argue with them and just to try to trip them up and prove them wrong. Okay, so hostile listeners are not a fan of what you have to say or not a fan of who you are as a speaker. So that can be tough to have a hostile listener. It might not be as dramatic as the example I'm giving, but it can happen. Concerned audience are eager listeners. So they're kind of in the middle. Think of them as like neutral. They're not committed audience members, but they're not contrary audience members. So they want to learn more. They are curious. They want to hear what you have to say, but they're not necessarily on your side, if you will, with that. They're not those agreeable listeners that are like, yeah, I agree. Okay, I just want to hear this to, go on board with what I already believe in. They're open-minded. They want to hear what you have to say. And then casual audience is an unexpected listener. So I know this box of me, I know that I'm blocking the picture, but what this picture is of is if you have ever gone to New Orleans, and I'm sure there are other places, but I know they're huge in New Orleans. There are like street performers. So these are guys, I've been to New Orleans like 4 times. That's not a brag. I'm just saying I went for a fraternity formal a few times with my family for a bachelorette party. Anyway, and I've seen them almost every time I've been there. So what they do is they are street performers, so they just perform on the street, and I don't know if they live off of tips, but basically tips are a big thing. It's kind of a norm that if you stand or come upon a street performer and stay there long enough to enjoy what they're doing, whether it's like magic tricks or, whatever, these guys would do like flips and jumps and getting like pyramids with each other. Anyway, if you did that, it was kind of a norm that expected that you tip them, that you give them money. So that could be a casual audience. It could be, I feel like a casual audience is kind of a little bit more rare. I don't know how many times people just stumble upon a speaking situation, but it could happen, right? Like it could be, you could be speaking at a conference and they get lost, but they overhear yours and they're like, oh, I guess I'll stay for this. Okay. So the types of audiences are very important because knowing that type of audience, and you might not know, right? But knowing what type of audience you have can really help you be sure that you are catering to that type of audience so that you can make it the most effective presentation that you can for them. All right, demographic audience analysis. I'm going to go through this kind of quick. I'm going to seem like I'm speaking on both sides of my mouth, but I'm not trying to. These can really help you, but at the same time, you don't want to just go with stereotypes because that can hurt you. So things like age, gender, race, ethnicity and culture, socioeconomic status, group affiliations, political affiliations, sexual orientation, and religion. So I want to tell you to be careful because, you know, I mean, obviously, like, these are going to dictate maybe what you talk about. So let's say you are asked to give a presentation of an important topic to a third grade class age, right? Probably wouldn't be a good idea to talk about putting into their retirement or their 401ks, right? They're going to be like, what are you talking about? You know, but you don't want to make too many assumptions. For example, with political affiliation, I know with the political affiliation I belong to or that I, you know, kind of believe in or whatever, there are stances that as a whole the political affiliation holds that I don't agree with. But I agree with more, you know, more, what am I trying to say? More items than the other side, or, you know, so, again, I'm not trying to confuse you, but it is important because the demographic audience analysis can help you, but you don't want to go to the other end and just make your whole thing stereotypical and, you know, almost offensive to where it's like, okay, we're not all like that. All, you know, everyone who is a part of this religion isn't like that or whatever. Okay. But it can help you and it can clue you into things that might be important to them, things that they might value, attitudes they might have. So it is really helpful to know if you can. Situational audience analysis. So the size is going to make a difference. The size of the room or the size of the audience. Physical setting, so time of day, temperature, overall setup. That can be really important. The time of the day, is it morning? Are they tired? The temperature, the overall setup of the room, are they going to be uncomfortable? Are they going to be able to see? Their orientation towards the topic, so their interests, knowledge, and attitudes, that's going to affect things. Orientation towards a speaker, are they familiar with you, your credibility, and orientation towards the occasion. So listeners have expectations, and sometimes you don't realize that until, you know, those expectations are broken, okay? If you want to watch that clip, that is an example of listener expectations. I think it's the right clip. It might not be, but it's from Kevin Hart when he's talking about his mom's funeral and how his uncle goes up and is like, Nancy owed me $50 and some change. How does it roll over? Do I get that from you? Whatever, we'll figure it out. And he says that like everyone was just appalled. And that's true, right? Like, what do you expect out of a funeral not to bring up that someone owes you money, right? So, we have the demographic audience analysis, and then the situational audience analysis is like the situation of the presentation, okay? All right, we will stop there, and then I'm going to start part 2 with the listening process.